Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theatre Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, Robin Hood Radio's very own critic. He joins us weekly. The films Let Him Go, A Rainy Day in New York, and Mank. Once again, so easy I won't even try. Hi, David. How are you?
Doing okay, Jill. How are you doing this week?
Refuse to complain? That's my new policy.
Ah, grand. Well, what an excellent policy that is, especially since I have things to say at this very moment. Once again, our theme this week, even though you have failed to make a sentence out of the titles, even though you claim it would have been so easy, the theme this week is that there is no theme. These movies are all very different from each other. However, they are all recent releases, and they are all out. So here we go. The first one that I want to talk about is called Let Him Go, and it is based on a novel. It was written and directed by Thomas Bezucha. And it has a good cast. It stars Kevin Costner and Diane Lane and Leslie Manville. And I would have to call it kind of a melodrama. But melodrama always seems, I always think of that as sort of drama in italics, drama that's sort of pushed and heightened. And in this case, that only happens after a while. The movie starts off in a very calm and sort of quiet way. Well, it actually starts out with somebody dying. But it's portrayed in a fairly quiet way. And then we get into the actual story itself. And the story gradually builds its emotional momentum until we reach a climax, and then we get to the end of the movie when things are more or less resolved. So what Let Him Go is about, the title apparently refers to a very little boy. And what happens at the beginning of the movie is that somebody is killed. By the way, this is sort of a modern-day Western in a way. That's what some people are calling it. I wouldn't really call it that because it has very little to do with what we associate with the Western genre, except that it takes place in Montana and North Dakota, and people ride horses. But it's very modern. It takes place in the 60s. And what we have is a person dies, and that he is the young man in a family, and then his wife remarries somebody else, and the parents of her late husband, whose name are Margaret and George, and who are played by Diane Lane and Kevin Costner, they suddenly start to have reason to really, really, really not like the man who their former daughter-in-law has married. And they don't worry so much about her. I mean, she's just their former daughter-in-law. So she wasn't even in the family all that terribly long. But they're very worried about the little boy who is their grandson. And what they actually, this is very early in the movie, so it's not a spoiler. What they see is the new husband actually hitting the child and his wife in a public sidewalk. And it's not a terribly dramatic thing, but it really, really upsets Margaret, who is one of our two main characters. And so she persuades her husband, George, that they have got to go and they've got to find out where these people are now living, which is not near them anymore. And they've got to somehow get the little boy away from this bad, bad man. So that is what the movie is all about. It is basically about this couple played by Diane Lane and Kevin Costner hunting about to find the new husband and their former daughter-in-law and somehow get the little boy away from them and bring him back where he'll be safe, at least as they conceive of safeness. So that's what the movie is about. So we have a good part of the movie, which is about this couple, Margaret and George, searching about to try to find this couple and the little boy. And then I will reveal this. They do find him, and then various things happen from there. So I really, really liked Let Him Go for about the first hour, maybe a little bit more than that. It's almost 2 hours long. It moves at a gradual pace. It's very, very well acted, very subtly underplayed. The people do not push their performances. They allow things to emerge rather than sort of waving them in our faces. I was very impressed with that. It's a very nicely directed movie, a beautifully photographed movie. Montana and North Dakota look quite nice. Then the movie does come to a climax. And the climax is all of a sudden really violent. It's brief, but it's pretty shocking. So there's a little advisory for you there on the content of it. A very, very violent and nasty sort of a climax. And then after that, to my mind at least, the movie goes downhill. The movie then becomes melodramatic. It then does start to push things and to get sort of garish and lurid, and is no longer subtle the way it was for, I would say, well over an hour on its way building up the story. So I think Let Him Go is a movie that almost succeeds. Again, very, very nicely acted. Kevin Costner and Diane Lane are both first-rate. Leslie Manville, wonderful English actress, plays the very un-English, well, let's just say a very nasty character who shows up in the second half of the movie, and she's very, very interesting and very well played. Whole lot of really, really good acting in this movie. But I would like the movie a lot better if it didn't start to get melodramatic and overdone and overcooked as it approaches its ending. Up until then, it's a really good film. I went to see it at a movie theater. It's playing out there in some of the theaters that are open, and I can recommend it if you want to see a movie that is almost successful. It doesn't quite make it. Our second movie today, A Rainy Day in New York, was written and directed by Woody Allen. Not a very popular figure these days. Of course, there have been very serious allegations against him, and the most serious ones appear to come from one of his children, from Dylan Farrow, and he has been really persona non grata in the movie world for a while now, all kinds of attacks on him and whatnot. Now, one of my feelings about this is that if we make a list of, I'm not going to say Woody Allen is an artist for the ages, but if we make a list of great artists who have had sinful personal lives, it'd be a pretty long list. And in fact, not everybody believes that the allegations made against Woody Allen are true. That said, I am not here to pass judgment on Woody one way or the other. I am here to pass judgment on his new movie, A Rainy Day in New York, which has a sort of a complicated history to it. It was part of a very, very major deal made between Woody and Amazon, Amazon acting as a movie producer. They had this multi-million-dollar deal. But then while this movie, A Rainy Day in New York, was being shot, was being made, the big Harvey Weinstein story broke. And all of a sudden, Hollywood and the world in general, I guess, got very, very exercised about things that it had not always been so exercised about. And suddenly, these allegations against Woody Allen had a whole new life and were taken way more serious than they had been before. The whole Me Too movement was flourishing, etc. And so Amazon said, we are not going to put this movie out before the public. The movie has been made, it's here, but we are not going to make any money off it. It is going to just sort of, nowadays things are all digital, but it's just going to sort of sit in the can, and we're not going to release it. Well, that didn't last forever, and then the movie did get showed in film festivals and stuff like that, and now it has been released, and you can very, very easily just stream it from video on demand. It's not hard to find, and it's there. So what do I think about this movie with its complicated history, and by the way, since then, Woody has completed another movie, so maybe we'll be seeing that one of these days. Woody has made a movie a year for a very, very long time now. So, A Rainy Day in New York. The first thing to say about it is that it has a sensational cast. Timothée Chalamet is wonderful in it. Elle Fanning, Liev Schreiber, other people too. Selena Gomez, really Jude Law, who I didn't even recognize for a while. Really, really interesting cast. The story is not so very, very interesting. The story has a young college couple played by Timothée Chalamet and Elle Fanning, and they are going to a college in upstate New York, and he has a lot of money. And they decide they're going to have a wonderful couple of days in New York where she is coming to interview a famous movie director for her college newspaper. So they come down, and she's going to do her interview, and he's going to show her around Manhattan, which is sort of an old stomping ground for him, and they're going to have a great time. The thing is that she, the young woman, Ashley, her name is, gets distracted by troubles that the movie director is having and ends up spending all of her time with him and with people in his circle, while poor Gatsby is left to fend for himself and gets into various adventures of his own. For about the first half, A Rainy Day in New York is basically just very static dialogue scenes between two people. Two people talk at each other, and they say Woody Allen kinds of lines, little witticisms and amusing things and complaints and gripes and this and that. So that's what happens for about half the movie. Then things get a little bit more interesting than that, and these two go about to various – they eventually do get together again, but not until the very end. Separately, they go to various places in New York, and they have various little adventures. Hers mostly involved the famous movie director played by Liev Schreiber and some of his circle, and his involved various people, including his mother, who turns out to be a rich and sort of a cranky old lady. So, what do I really think of A Rainy Day in New York? This is one of Woody's least funny movies. I remember the days when he was known for making movies that were very, very funny. There's almost nothing worth laughing at in A Rainy Day in New York. Also, it is almost pure Woody Allen shtick, which is to say, it's all these dialogue scenes. It's all people talking to each other. This is not a plot-driven movie. It's not even a character-driven movie. It's very much a talk-driven movie. Almost all of it taking place in New York, and in Manhattan, I should say. A little bit of it goes to Queens, which, of course, Woody Allen has been having a love affair with for decades and decades. And this is sort of the worst kind of Woody Allen movie. It's very rich, very privileged people going around to picturesque places in Manhattan, all photographed so they look absolutely gorgeous by the great Italian cinematographer Vittorio Storaro. And the point is, it's not funny, it's not interesting, and yet it's really quite pleasant to watch because of all these beautiful places and these lovely people in the cast. So I watched it. I just sort of sat there. I took it in. It washed over me. It was sort of like a warm bath. And on that level, I kind of recommend it. But if you're against Woody Allen, you're not going to want to see it at all. And even if you're for Woody Allen, let's just say this is one of his very minor offerings. Final film for today, Jill, is called Mank, and that is the nickname of the main character, who is Herman Mankiewicz, who was the writer of the co-writer, according to the credits, but some people feel the actual writer of the great movie Citizen Kane, made by Orson Welles and released in 1941, and considered by many people to be the greatest movie of all time, or at least maybe the greatest American movie of all time. And it's definitely a very great movie. And if there's anybody listening who has never seen Citizen Kane, the time has come. Mank is about the writer of this movie. Again, some people say that Welles wrote it along with Mank. According to the movie, Mank wrote the whole thing pretty much by himself, and Orson Welles wasn't even anywhere near around. But that is what the movie is about. And it's about Herman Mankiewicz writing this movie, getting into various kinds of troubles. He's a big drinker, and that's part of the challenge of everybody's facing in making the movie. And that's what the movie is about. It's kind of a biopic because it's sort of about Herman Mankiewicz. The movie jumps back and forth in time very, very frequently between the 1930s and the early 1940s, sometimes later than that even, while we have the saga of the writing of Citizen Kane. Interestingly, the movie was directed by David Fincher, who is a very interesting director who's made some very, very major movies over the year. I'll mention Seven and The Social Network, which I think is his best, The Game, Zodiac. He's been around for a long time. He's made a lot of really major films. Mank was written by his father. His father died several years ago, and this is the only screenplay that Jack Fincher ever wrote, or at least that ever got produced. But the interesting case here, where we have the son, David Fincher, directing a screenplay by his father, Jack Fincher. And there's a really, really good cast in this movie once again. We have Gary Oldman, very English actor, but doing a wonderful job playing the very American Herman Mankiewicz. Amanda Seyfried plays Marion Davies, who is the mistress of the legendary William Randolph Hearst, who is played by Charles Dance, etc. Tom Burke plays Orson Welles. Really good cast. Now, anybody who is familiar at all with Citizen Kane knows that Citizen Kane is a disguised, very, very sort of negative biography of William Randolph Hearst, the great newspaper impresario and czar of the 1930s and 1940s. And so parts of the movie Mank, of course, deal with that. William Randolph Hearst is not one of the main characters, but he's definitely a character. And his mistress, Marion Davies, also an actress, is one of the main characters of the movie. So we have here that as sort of a subplot woven through it. We have William Randolph Hearst and his growing rage as he realizes that this movie is going to come out and be a very sarcastic attack on him and so forth. And we have Herman Mankiewicz writing the screenplay despite his battles with alcohol and whatnot. And we have Orson Welles waiting for the screenplay to get completed. And we have various other characters sort of swirling around the periphery. So Now, what do I think of Mank? This movie about this fascinating subject, and especially for people who love movies, it's an extra fascinating subject. The trouble with Mank is its screenplay. It is just very, very glib and facile and full of snappy one-liners that nobody in the real world would ever actually say. And it just goes on and on like that. And I just got really tired of hearing these people hurl these very artificial, very concocted lines at each other for well over 2 hours. The cinematography attempts to have the sort of deep focus splendor that Citizen Kane has, but here it's all done with digital cinematography, and it looks beautiful, but it doesn't have the kind of authenticity, the kind of grit, the kind of real feeling that the cinematography for Citizen Kane has. So after a while, I just got in fact, after a short while, I just got really, really tired of Mank. It just didn't have any real feeling to it. It doesn't have any real feeling to it. So if you're fascinated by the movies, if you're fascinated by the 1930s and 40s, by all means go to see Mank. It has a lot of interesting stuff tucked around in it. But if you want to hear good dialogue in a really imaginatively photographed movie, look someplace else than Mank. It's just, I found it a very great disappointment. So that is my somewhat switching around from one thing to another story this week, Joe.
Thank you very much, David Sterritt. Films in Focus, the films Let Him Go, A Rainy Day in New York, and Mank.